Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to continue on the all-time records for each franchise in the regular season up to the finish of the 2022 regular season. So today we're going to cover the Calgary Flames, who had kind of a record I both expect and didn't expect, granted their history. So much like the Arizona Coyotes and the original Jets and the current Winnipeg Jets and the Atlanta Thrashers, this will cover the Atlanta Flames as well. So it's their entire franchise history. Now, for most people who watched hockey in the 80s, some of these numbers aren't going to entirely surprise them because Calgary was such a dominant force for a while there. But to anybody who's watched Calgary in the last, say, 10 years, it's been kind of middling and inconsistent. So they have been around for 49 seasons, and of those, they've made 31 playoff appearances. So that number is about what I expected. They were definitely in at a time where more teams made the playoffs than didn't. And of those 31 appearances, they do have a single Stanley Cup that was in 1989 against the Montreal Canadiens. Calgary has 5 retired numbers. Well, sort of. They have 3 officially retired numbers and then 2 that are honored through their Forever a Flame program. So the numbers are 2, 9, 12, 25, and 30. The 3 retired numbers are number 9 for Lanny McDonald, number 12 for Jarome Iginla, and number 30 for Mike Vernon. So Lanny McDonald and Mike Vernon, part of that Stanley Cup winning team. Jarome Iginla is arguably the best player Calgary's ever had. He's the franchise leader in a whole bunch of categories. So those numbers kind of make sense when they're not available anymore. So when I looked at Calgary's records, I found that they had a positive record against 24 other teams in the league. Now, here's the thing. Like every other team, I did have a break line of if they were break even, so the 50% points percentage, I qualified that as a positive record. So through the regular season, they have played 3,872 games. Of those, 1,815 are wins, 1,517 are losses, 379 of those are ties, and 161 of them are overtime losses. So just like every other team before this, I went with the wins as stands and then totaled the losses between losses, ties, and overtime losses. Just qualified it as either you won or you lost. And that came out to a win percentage of 47%. So a lot of that did come from the 80s when they were dominant, seemed year after year, which kind of offset the recent history Calgary's had where they've been mostly middling with a few flashes of brilliance in there. But I've never done overly poorly, I would say. So yeah, that record sounds about right overall. Now, when we go to the breakdown for each team, there was a couple things that stood out a little bit. One is that between the 2 most recent expansion teams, mixed results. So the Seattle Kraken have met Calgary 4 times. Calgary's beat them all 4 times. I expect that to not be the case moving forward, but we'll see how Seattle does. And at the bottom, the Vegas Golden Knights, they've had 14 meetings and Calgary's only won 4 of them. So they only have the 286 percentage. So opposite ends there. They like to see one team. They don't really like to see the other one. Now, you'll notice in here that instead of having 7 teams highlighted, I've got 8. And that's because I've got the 7 other teams currently in the Pacific Division. But I've also included the Arizona Coyotes because they moved this year. And at 207 games played against Calgary, that was a sample size where it was relevant to their divisional success. And Calgary has pretty good success within their division, except for Anaheim and Vegas. They have winning records against every team in the Pacific, starting at .545 as a percentage. So that's pretty good. That should tell you that historically speaking, they're more likely to do well within their division. Now, what really surprised me is that after 108 meetings against the New Jersey Devils, they have a record of 71, 24, 11, and 2, which gives them a 718 points percentage. That is a lot. That's got to be probably top 3 points percentages we've seen in the series so far, if not the top one. Obviously, again, Seattle being such a small sample size, I've basically omitted them from most of the information until we can get them into, say, like the Vegas standpoint, or after 5-10 years where we can actually start to see the trends and how they're working. The Vancouver Canucks, I expected Calgary to have them pretty high up on the list, just because through most of the 80s, the 90s, Calgary used Vancouver as a punching bag. That was a bit before my time, but according to the hockey guy, when he was watching hockey, that seemed to be the running narrative all the time. The interesting thing here is that against the Vancouver Canucks, Calgary's actually only 3 goals away from 1,000 scored against the franchise. So that's an interesting anecdote. It looks like the next closest one is the Edmonton Oilers with 897 so far. And yeah, and then after that, yeah, you've got like 3 teams that Calgary has seen basically their entire history, and then everyone else is like way down there. So yeah, that was an interesting fact. What surprised me though, when I looked through the history between the Calgary Flames and the Edmonton Oilers, like the Battle of Alberta, in the playoffs, Edmonton beats Calgary. Like the record is so far in Edmonton's favor, but through the regular season, that's not the case. Calgary actually has a 548 win percentage at 130 wins, 105 losses, 19 ties, and 6 overtime losses. That surprised me when I came across that. And Calgary actually outscores Edmonton, a team that during their heyday was their game plan was outscore the problems. Defense is optional. But watching the Battle of Alberta from where I am, it always seemed like Edmonton for a long time just won and won and won. But I do also remember a significant period of time following the Edmonton Oilers' 2006 run to the Stanley Cup playoffs, or the Stanley Cup final, sorry, that basically after that, it seemed like Edmonton couldn't buy a win from Calgary, so I think that's a large portion of that. But hey, when you look at the history overall, doesn't matter when or how, it's just that you did, right? So that kind of surprised me. Anaheim being as far down the list as it is did not surprise me, because Calgary, for it seemed like forever, couldn't buy a win against Anaheim, and especially not in Anaheim. If it was a home game against the Ducks and it was Calgary, I didn't even bother watching. I knew that was going to be a loss. That narrative changed a few years ago, and it seems like they're starting to balance back out. I would say right around the time when Corey Perry wasn't in that lineup anymore. That was right about when it seemed to change. So maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe not. Yeah, other than that, I think I remember one other thing that stood out as an interesting factoid. The Minnesota Wild. So this was interesting to me because Calgary has a 622 points percentage. So they're 53, 29, 4, and 12 against Minnesota, but they only have a 3-goal differential. So they have a significant amount more wins, but the goal differential is basically break even. I thought that was an interesting stat for sure. And Tampa Bay Lightning, even though Calgary has a 488 against Tampa, which a lot of Calgary fans aren't generally Tampa fans. Thinking back to 04. No, I'm not getting into that. I do have my own thoughts. I'll post a video about various controversial things at another time. But they're dead even on scoring, which surprises me, especially with how good Tampa's been over the last little bit, that they walk over everybody, and I seem to recall that was the case with Calgary too. And other than that, everything else seems to line up basically as you would expect it to. Yeah, nothing that really stands out. But Calgary really likes when New Jersey visits, because at 3.9 goals for and 2.68 goals against, that's a team that you generally don't have too many struggles with. So that was interesting. Yeah, Metro, Atlantic. Yeah, outside the division, most of Calgary's success comes from Eastern teams: the New York Rangers, the Blue Jackets, the Senators, and the Colorado Avalanche. I was also surprised Calgary had such a high percentage against the Avalanche, especially recently. Um, the Jets being close to break even, Blackhawks and Penguins break even. So that was one thing I made a note of a long time ago. Is I've watched my fair share of hockey, and whenever teams like Pittsburgh and Washington and Chicago, when they were in their heyday through the 2010s, like these really good top teams, everyone would be like, oh, great, we're going to lose. But typically, Calgary never really seemed to struggle with the top tier teams. It was usually the teams that you weren't expecting to beat Calgary. So like your Arizona Coyotes, your Buffalo Sabres, those were the teams Calgary seemed to struggle with. So when Crosby and the Penguins would come by, okay, all right, fine, it's going to be another game. They might win, they might lose. I remember back in I think it was 2019, Calgary's first visit from Pittsburgh, spanked them like 10-1. It was a ridiculous score, and it was like an open hand slap to Calgary's face. And then it just seemed like after that, they're like, nope, pew, and they just took off in the standings. A season that I don't think Calgary would be able to replicate, and the only reason that they weren't the President's Trophy winners that year was because Tampa went on a literal record-tying run. That was the only reason. So, yeah, Calgary, middling results, but I guess when they need to get it in gear, you can reasonably rely that they could. So, yeah, that's Calgary's history. I've always found they were a fun team to watch, even when they were kind of middling. But for a team that never had an all-star roster like they've had in the last couple of years since the 80s, that's a pretty respectable record. So most Flames fans should be happy overall. And again, at the end of all this, once I have all 32 teams gone through, I'm going to take their overall records just as they are, and then I'm going to line them up and see who actually sits where, and what fan bases can bark at other ones with actual proof, because you hear who's the best. Well, this team's the best, that team's the best, and we're going to put the numbers down. So that being said, thank you so much for coming by and checking out the video. If you did like the video, please drop a like. If you want to see more, please drop a subscribe. And I'm still planning to do one video a day covering this. Hopefully next week I'll be able to start getting a second series rolling and see if I can get those going. But we'll see how those go. And if you have anything that you would like to share about Calgary's history that people may not know about, please drop it in the comments section below. And let me know, what did you think of Calgary's record overall? Did it seem right to you? Did it seem off? That kind of thing. And maybe we can chat that out and see what everyone thinks about that. But until the next video, stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you and all the best. Oh, one other thing before I go. I have really been bad about this, but right down here, I do have a Twitter. It's at CPTJohnny15 because Captain Johnny 15 doesn't fit. If you want to follow me on there and come chat hockey on there, I check it on a daily basis. And yeah, I'm going to try and get better about making sure people know about that as well. Until the next one, thank you and all the best.